I wonder, Annalise, because one of the great debates about trials in developing countries that has consumed doctors is the issue of where, I mean, it was raised famously by Marsha Angel, of where in a developing country you do a trial, and this was one of trying to reduce vertical transmission of AIDS in pregnant women, against a placebo. And her argument was, well, it's impossible, you shouldn't really be using a placebo, that's unethical because there is, an established treatment that already can be used. But the counter-argument, which actually comes from people very interested in global health, is, well, there isn't much point in testing a treatment that's completely unaffordable in a developing world context, and therefore it is legitimate to test a drug that would not, if you were testing it in a rich country, you would have to test it against the usual treatment. But in a developing country, it can be legitimate because actually this could be given to people. Or similarly, we had submitted to us a trial of could you use fever therapy in China. You actually gave people fever. Would that help with HIV infection? Now, again, I think that trial would be completely unethical in the Netherlands or Germany or Britain or Spain. But in a Chinese context, where lots of people are never ever going to get access to drugs, it may be ethical.
Yeah, this issue on the discussion on placebos is a very complicated issue. But I think we should also ask ourselves the question is why certain drugs are unaffordable in developing countries. And I think, in principle, drugs should be tested against the best proven treatment. And I think pharmaceutical companies should make an effort to at least make the best proven treatment available and affordable for the control group. And there has been a recent discussion also on a study on a certain drug for people with severe schizophrenia. Some of these drugs were tested in, for example, India, and the placebo or the control group received a placebo, and a lot of these people have very severe setbacks. And you also have to wonder, in that sense, is it ethical for people to receive a placebo? Because the health system is so weak, is that when people get a severe setback, do they have access to proper treatment to neutralize or get them back on track again? So in principle, I think and also according to the latest version of the Declaration of Helsinki, a placebo-controlled trial should only be used if there are no chances of an irreversible health damage, let's say, to people, or if there's scientifically very heavily weighing arguments to do so. So in principle, I think you should use the same standards for clinical trials in developing countries as in the West.
Thank you for...
I thought you said something very interesting. It was all very interesting, but this was especially interesting, is that you mentioned that clinical trials should be publicly funded. I completely agree with you. I think that's something that is very important, but I wonder how this could be implemented, because what we see at the national level is that governments they want to leave financing of research, and not only medical research, but all kinds of research, to the private sector. This would be a reverse of this trend. And how do you think that something like this could be done? Are there any models in countries where this is already taking place?
Well, I think in a minute Christian will give you a good answer to this question. He was telling me something he's been reading recently from the US. But let me say a few words first. I mean, it's exactly the same position really across Europe and the US, that there are huge demands on research budgets. There are so many different sorts of research that research funders think, well, it doesn't make sense for us to fund drug research because that's the one bit that does have easy access to private money to fund it. But I think there's no doubt that this can be counterproductive. So, for example, pharmaceutical companies are very reluctant to do what are called head-to-head trials. I talked about non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. I mean, the reason that so many of those trials come out favourably to the pharmaceutical companies is that they are tested against placebo rather than... And if you've got 20 drugs, as you literally have, if we could do trials, all of those against each other, we would probably learn that there wasn't much difference between them, in which case let's go for the cheapest, or that some of them are significantly better than others. I often use the example, so I think there could be an economic argument actually for investing in this, and Christian will tell you more in a minute. And I particularly remember, because there are some trials that are funded with public money and have been in Britain, and perhaps it would be interesting to hear more about here, because I heard today that there's a fund of 12 million euros for doing trials that are to avoid the pharmaceutical companies. But I think particularly of a trial that was funded by the National Health Service in Britain that was eventually published in the Lancet. It was a trial of different treatments of acne, which is incredibly common. I mean, all around the world there must be huge numbers of drugs prescribed every day for patients with acne. And yet there had never really been a comparison of the different sorts of treatments. And this was a trial that compared topical antibiotics, where you rub them on the skin, as against taking them by mouth, as against benzoyl peroxide, which is a kind of standard treatment. And it discovered, A, that none of the treatments were all that good, and B, the opposite of what I'd been taught at medical school was that actually topical steroids are as good as systemic. And so I think you finally had the kind of high-quality information that Christian has asked for. But this is sort of 30 years after people have been treating acne day in, day out. So I think it's entirely conceivable that you could make an economic case that actually investing in trials of drugs could be beneficial to the economy. But Christian will tell us more.
Yes, I can take the ball and, There's one concept, it's developed by an economist. His name is Dean Baker. He's from the Washington Center of Economic Research. And he developed a model of coordinating clinical trials by a governmental institution. And he's counting, very detailed, that this system would be much cheaper for the whole society than the system we have now. So his concept is he's taking the US as a pilot project as the main market also. And his concept is there would be one central institution, a governmental institution for clinical trials. It's split up in different sectors, one sector for diabetes, another for cancer, etc., etc. And these specialized groups, they work together with the industry. They are always up to date what the industry is doing. It's quite secret, but they work together. So, for example, they ask all the companies, what potential candidates for new diabetes drugs do you work on? And then the companies say, we are working on this, and then the office, the governmental institution, they would choose, let's say, the industry has 10 different candidates for new drugs. Then the institution, the governmental institution, chooses from this 10. They say, okay, these 5 candidates, they look very good. We will do further research on them, and the other 5, they are not good. Please stop. So, and then, because it's a governmental institution, they have a certain amount of money they can spend on these clinical trials. So the clinical trials, so then the institution, the governmental institution, they develop the design for the studies and say, okay, we will do this study. Then the studies would not be done by the governmental institution, but by contract research organizations or by the companies. And everybody who is doing that work will get paid for that work. But it's always completely transparent because the governmental institution is always knowing who is doing what, and the results will be published at the end.